Up in the sky, what do I see? A UFO is looking at me. Lights flashing all around, bass bumping from the ground. Aliens grooving to the beat, hip-hop rhythms got them on their feet. Strange beings shaped to the flow, spaceships rocking to the show. I see a UFO flying high in the night, moving to the sound, everything's alright. Dancing in the stars and neon light, hop to the beat till the morning light. I see a UFO flying high in the night, moving to the sound, everything's alright. Dancing in the stars under neon light, hop to the beat till the morning bright. I see a UFO flying high in the night, moving to the sound, everything's alright. Dancing in the stars and neon light, hop to the beat till the morning light. I'm the god, I rise and shine in this realm I'm divine. Like the world was just a sign, feel the power, it's all mine, all mine. Thunder claps, the sky obeys, in my hands lightning plays. Mountains bow, the ocean sway, I command night and day. I'm a god, feel the force, every star on my course. Follow me, I'm the source, life itself flows.
Good morning. All right. Good morning. Welcome in. Today is episode is titled Romulus. I thought it fairly appropriate since we're talking about many different things, including, I didn't even think of this when I thought about the title, because the title is this is not what I thought about, but we got the new Pope, and they're in Rome. And who founded Rome? And who's Rome named after? Romulus. But today it's titled Romulus because of the dire wolves and the cloning and all of that going on. They named the wolves Romulus, Remus, and I forget what they named the third one, which was a female. It was interesting because I was listening to people talk about it, and they're like, oh, but it's not really a dire wolf because uh, it's not like living in the same environment that it lived in 10,000 years ago. It's like, bro, you're an idiot. If it's genetically a dire wolf, it's a dire wolf. Just because, let's say I genetically grew an apple and I colored it the color orange, but it's still an apple. Is it an orange? No, it's a fucking apple, you fucking dingbat. So, it's a freaking apple. All right, so it's a dire wolf. End of the story. And but everybody's saying, you know, should we be cloning dire wolves? Should we be attempting this? Should human beings be attempting to do these crazy things? Yes, definitely yes. And everybody said, I was listening to some Rakannis the other day, and he talked about this like a couple weeks ago. But for me, being an immortal god, a couple weeks is like, a few hours, maybe a few minutes, depending on, the day. And so I'm sitting there, and he's talking about his poll question, and I think it was like, should human beings attempt to be cloning dire wolves or whatever? Most people said no in the poll, and I was blown away by that. Why the hell wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, we're not creating Jurassic Park here. Like, let's be real. Y'all just look in like your mind instantly thinks movies and fantasy and fiction and whatever. And it's like it's like, for example, like we think of dragons in mythology as fire breathing winged beasts with hoarding gold and doing all this stuff. And it's implausible. If we were correct in our postulation that dinosaurs and the remnants of them could have been the idea for Komodo dragons. Morning, Professor. And the question is really, how would they have survived, and when does our memory go back to? Because you got to remember, our just because we have these stories doesn't mean it was 500 years ago. It could be so traumatic that we're remembering these stories for not hundreds of years, but thousands of years. For example, we found fossilized evidence of human footprints at the same time as a dinosaur footprint. The problem is if you look at the measurements, it's not really the same as like a 65 million year old Tyrannosaurus Rex. Those feet would be huge. It's still big, but it's not the same exact thing. And so it would point to the evidence that there's a trickle down, a descendancy. And we know that there was, because literally chickens are dinosaurs. I mean, this morning for my breakfast just ate some nice, fantastic baby dinosaurs. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, those baby dinosaurs were so delicious this morning. Ugh. And if you don't understand what I'm referring to, I mean eggs. Because if chickens are eggs and you're eating, I mean, if chickens lay eggs, right, and the egg is a baby chicken unborn or unfertilized, I'm literally eating a baby dinosaur because dinosaurs are chickens. So my breakfast this morning was a baby dinosaur. Fantastic. Absolutely delicious. So we know that because the chickens and birds relate to dinosaurs, we know that dinosaurs survived the extinction 65 million years ago. I mean, if they didn't, there would be no birds, and I wouldn't be eating a baby dinosaur for breakfast. So there you go. But so the memory could be so vivid that it's so traumatic that we remember it for all these years. And then it becomes mythologized into these fire-breathing winged beasts and all of that, when in reality it was just some giant dinosaur or monster or whatever. And we think of, for example, you think of giants. When I think of a giant, for example, in my imagination, I immediately envision, this 20, 30-foot tall being. But if you look at giant humanoid bones that have been found over the past few decades and centuries, since like the mid 1800s, if not earlier, I only know of the mid 1800s. These beings that they found were about 8 to 9 to 10 feet tall. Well, if you only grow to between 5 and 6.5 feet at most, 8 feet is a giant. Because you got to think about it, it's not just that he's tall and lanky. It's that every other muscle and bone and tooth and everything has to be proportional to that size being. So you're talking about beings with giant hands, giant feet, and all of that are a lot bigger because they're bigger. They're just naturally bigger, so it's got to fill out. You can't just be some tall, spindly thing or whatever, or at least not on this planet, because we need the muscle to fight against gravity and all of that. So the point is that we have all this evidence that it continues on. So why wouldn't you? Want to continue on studying all of that? These beings must be something. For example, and you want to say, oh, well, it's so traumatic, it can't be, last thousands of years. Look at the stories of the Great Flood. Not only are they found in the Bible, and in the Torah and in the Quran, they're found in India, in South America, in North America, in Japan, in Persia, in basically everywhere. And I don't care about your thing. Get off of there. And in Persia, and so basically these stories are so prevalent that it lasts thousands of years. And now we know that today, through geological evidence, that the flood really did happen. It was about 12,000 years ago-ish. So 12,000 years ago, a little bit more. No, wait, what year are we in? It was almost 14,000 years ago, excuse me, about 11,000 BC. But we keep talking about that. It's in every one of our religious books. So that proves that a traumatic event like that could last in our minds, in our consciousness, in our history, in our stories, even in our religion, for centuries, for millennia, thousands and thousands of years. And the reason why it's so, it would be so important is because everything changed. The world changed. But the world isn't the same as 10,000 years ago. It's not the same as 65 million years ago when the dinosaurs lived. Otherwise, I wouldn't be having chicken for breakfast. I'd be having literal giant dinosaur eggs for breakfast. Because they'd literally still be the same. They would be the exact same as they were 65 million years ago. But they're not. They've shrunken down, they've grown more feathers and fur and less scales and skin and all this stuff. And so, they've changed. but they're still genetically similar creatures, and we could see that they are ancestors of each other. So in a way, that person who made the comment about how it's not the same creature isn't entirely wrong, because it's not going to grow up to be the same creature as it would have been 10,000 plus years ago when the dire wolves existed. So when we look at these creatures and we say, though, should we be cloning them? I say the answer is absolutely yes. And the reason is because think about all the scientific advantages you can do. Now, here's a question, though. Let's say we advanced our technology. Like so much that I can 3D print a clone of myself, right? Let's say I get a genetic sample of me at this age. I have a bunch of genetic samples of me at this age. And, I'm now 80 years old. Old, wrinkly, whatever. And I could just sit there and, continue on like the rest of us until my time is over, and then we keep going. Or I could 3D print a new one of myself. And then there's a new me that's going to keep living for the next 80 years until I 3D print another clone of myself. And then I keep living on for 80 years, and then I 3D print another clone of myself. And then I keep living on for another 80 years, or plus however many years that I can extend my life for, with modern medicine of the time and whatever. So the idea is that you could essentially live forever. The question really is then more of a psychological one than of anything else, or kind of even an ethical one, you could argue. The question is, would I be the same? Well, if you listen to that person who made the comment before about how it's not the same because it's not the same environment, the answer is no. It wouldn't be the same growing up that I did. It wouldn't have the same youth experiences. It might be better, might be worse. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't be the same environment, the same amount of oxygen on the planet, the same amount of food I ate, the same type of food I ate, the same location of where the food came from. All of those things, it would not be the same. But we also know that environment doesn't determine exactly who you are. It only is a part of it. But would I be the same me? All my teeth structure are the same, my body and bone structure is the same, my brain structure is the same, my nervous system is the same. I'm literally a 1-for-1, 100% copy of me that I just 3D printed. The only difference is, and remember, when I'm 3D printing it, I'm 3D printing it fully formed at a 25-year-old. So if I take in my age at 25, or what did I say, 20 before? It doesn't matter. It's a hypothetical situation. So if I take my age at 25 and then and then I clone myself into a fully formed 25-year-old, am I going to be the exact same? Maybe physically, maybe even I would think in a similar way because my brain is fully formed. But would I or would I not have the same consciousness? Because my consciousness would be based on experiences, understanding, knowledge, but that clone of me doesn't have that. Or do they? Because some scientists are starting to speculate that our brains as human beings aren't just in our brain, but also stored in our entire muscular system and in our nervous system. Genetic memories, yes. And so in a way, they're starting to compare us to octopus because octopus's brains exist all throughout their body and they have multiple physical brains like in our brain, in their brain, in other parts of their body, which you would speculate would be something that was like what's the word for it? I'm speculating that they would be like nodes, like, like in an electrical system, like when I'm having a power supply system, I have the power goes for as far as it goes, and then there's a relay station, and then the power, steps up again and continues on. So if you think about it, those other brains in their arms and in their whatever parts of their body could be like different like nodal points, where they just like recharge the energy or store different things. You have no idea. I mean, we have no idea. We don't even know what's going on in the inner workings of our own brains today. I mean, so but you could speculate all these different things. And so if we're speculating these things, and let's just say, for example, we store some of our memory and our thoughts in our muscles, right? Then if I cloned myself to a fully formed 25-year-old, I might actually still have all the thoughts and memories, or at least most of them, inside all the muscles that are in my body and that were fully formed at 25. And it could be entirely possible if it is the case that we were storing our memories not only in our brains but in our muscles and in our throughout our nervous system, using our nervous system to send those things, to send that information, could possibly be the reality. And if it is the reality, then cloning myself at 25 into a fully formed 25-year-old would have the same memories and thoughts, or at least most of them, that I had or have at the same time I cloned myself and took that DNA sample from myself. So if I did that and cloned myself like that, I could be the same me. So if I'm 80 years old and clone myself and then I'm a fully formed 25-year-old again, then all of a sudden I'm me at 25 and I got a whole nother life to go along. The problem is, if I'm still alive when that fully formed clone becomes alive and becomes conscious, is it really me? Think about that, for example. Think about that in your brain. If I'm still alive and I fully clone myself, everything, genetics, muscles, fingernails, teeth, hair, everything down to a 1-to-1 ratio, 100% to 100% the same, identical. But I'm still alive in my consciousness and in my brain. And that clone, I'm pointing over this way, like as if there's really another me over there. Here I am, it's me and myself, and then there's I over there. Um, so, but if I were to clone myself over there, and 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 if I were to listen, and if I were to be both alive, are we really the same being? The answer, I think, is no. If I'm still alive, I'm still conscious, I'm still living, I'm still doing all these things, and that clone of me over there, I still keep looking to the right as if there's really a me there. In my imagination, there is. Now, if I keep looking, if I keep looking, oh my God, I'm like joking with myself now. If there's a clone of me and I'm still alive, and they're still alive, and I'm conscious, and they're conscious, are we the same? I think the answer is absolutely not. Because I'm still me. I'm still living. I'm still breathing. I'm still doing all these things. So genetically, you might be the same, but you're not me. It's almost like the twin paradox. If you're my twin, and we're basically genetically the same, but we're not entirely the same, because your experiences are slightly different. Even if we grow up in the same home, eat the same exact food at the same exact times every single day, have the same conversations, you wouldn't have the same boyfriends, or if you did, that might be a little weird, but whatever, you do you. And you wouldn't have the same boyfriend or girlfriend. You wouldn't have, you literally wouldn't look at the same physical perspective of no, that was right. You wouldn't have the same physical perspective. For example, my eyes are literally over here, and the clone me's eyes could be all the way over here. So if that clone is not viewing life through the same lens that I'm viewing it, we might have the same everything else, but we don't have the same literal experiences, so then it's not going to grow up to be exactly the same either. So it might be genetically the same, but it's not me. But what if, for example, as soon as that clone was born, I died? Now that clone is the only me there is. There's no me. There's just the clone. Is it really a clone? Or is it me? Because it would be genetically a clone, but it's me. It's got all my same, thought pattern, some of my memories, most of other things. And Toker, but were I really the original? That's a great question. If you believe in the gods genetically messing with us, then the answer is no, not the original. But the question would be then, would that clone be me? The answer is yes, because there's no other me to compare it to. I'm dead. I might be its, genetic clone donator, but at that point, it's genetic donator, but at that point, what's the difference between that and my ancestors? My ancestors are my, I'm basically a genetic product of all my ancestors over the past however many decades or centuries. Same thing for every other human being. Now, you're not a one-to-one clone, you're a 50-50 clone. So, you could, and then you're not exactly the same either, because then you again have different experiences. So, but at that point, what would be the difference between me and my ancestors? If I was no longer alive and the clone was the only me that there was, at this point, I'm just their ancestor. I'm just, a relative. You know, Uncle WARR, Daddy WARR, donated his genes to me. And now I'm Daddy WARR. I mean, it's all the same. So the answer to me, though, is, do I think that we should be doing these experiments? They were hand-me-downs. Yo, oh my God. That was fucking funny. They were hand-me-downs. Oh man, yes, they were hand-me-downs. Yes, no, it was it's very funny. No, don't apologize. That was hilarious. That was good. That was actually 100% accurate also. So, but no, so the question is should we be doing this? That's the idea. And I think abso-freaking-lutely, absolutely, the amount of scientific knowledge and information that comes out of that, are you kidding me? The amount of scientific advancement, genetic advancements. I mean, if you could clone a being, a one-to-one relationship, you could cure any disease. That being that you could clone, let's say I took a DNA sample of myself again at 25, right? And I cloned myself, but this time I messed with the genes. I made it so my muscles grew bigger, my body grew bigger, I became a little larger. My brain was twice the size. I made it so my metabolism could and my genes could automatically replace themselves as soon as my cells die out. Well, if my cells are replacing myself as soon as they die out and break down, well, I'm not really aging at that point. Remember, we've talked about hundreds of times that age and mortality is basically defined as being confined to the age and metabolic processes of life and the constraints of time and aging. So if we don't age, if our metabolic processes don't age, because they keep getting replaced with new ones as soon as they die out, then we ourselves won't age. So if I could fix that problem in the clone, I'd only have to keep myself alive. I'd only have to keep, not myself alive, I'd be able to stay alive. As long as you didn't cut my head off, I'm living. So if you if you need to, so if you could be immortal without any metabolic processes, oh yeah, Toker, we're getting there, don't you worry. And if you could be, any of these metabolic processes could no longer occur in the time frame, and they would just keep replenishing and starting over, basically, your body wouldn't live. So the only thing you would need to do is keep genetic samples of yourself, so that just in case something happened to your physical body, you can make a new one of you. And so what if I was in a war and my arm got cut off? I could just grow a new one, and that's it. I could just grow a new one. Funds providing, of course. Well, you got to think about it. We're in the future now. 3D printers are so relevant that I could just, print a whole new arm of me. It's no problem. Costs like, $10 an arm. Because the future is just so, our science is so advanced. Big deal. $10 an arm, it's like breakfast. It's like that baby dinosaur I just ate for breakfast. It was fantastic. And and we do print meat now. That's exactly right. We print ears, noses, pretty soon we'll be able to print an eyeball, an arm, a fully arm, and be able to attach it. So, but we'll get there, Toker. Where that's part of today's talk, is the technology behind it. So, the so if I could just do that, I could just live forever. Replace my body, not be constrained by time, have no issues going on, nothing. Everything is chilling like a villain. Everybody's having a great time. That's exactly what it would be. Is I could just I could just keep on replacing myself. I could just keep on living forever because I could just print new organs and new things. One of the, one of the, I'd say, physical evidence that we have to prove that our brains do exist in part of our muscles. Maybe it's not that they exist in part of our muscles, but maybe it's the fact that the nervous system flows through our muscular system and through our body as like an extension of our brain, almost like the legs and arms of the brain. And this could be true, and it could be proven by the phenomenon of what's known as ghost limbs, where, people lose an arm and, and then they say, oh, my arm's itchy. And you're like, dude, you don't have an arm. Your arm got cut off. Or what about all these soldiers who come back and they lose an arm and they lose a leg or something, and then they still feel it, they say, and so it's, some people think it's the psychosomatic effect. You're so used to that arm being there over decades and years and whatever, that when you lose it, you're psychologically expected to be there. And in reality, it's not there because, it got cut off or whatever happened to it. So, but, maybe that's it, actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, we're speculating on it. Maybe that is it. Maybe the nervous system is really like the extension of your brain. You're feeling these things because the nervous system is reaching out and grabbing those areas and doing those things. And actually, if you look in the field of modern robotics, where they're trying to 3D, well, I'm not trying to 3D print. They're trying to create a an artificial nervous system for these robots. And it actually makes sense because they have I was watching this whole thing where they're explaining how the fingertips, and how they're like a soft thing, and when you press on it, you can feel the decompression in it, and then that goes through the nodes and the wires back, all the way back to the central processing area. Well, if you think about it, that's exactly what our brains do. Our brains do the same exact thing. As soon as I press on my finger, press on your finger right now. As soon as you press on your finger, that feeling goes straight from your finger all the way up to your brain and then back down to your finger, and you know that you're pressing your finger. And not only that, but your other hand is feeling the pressure of your thumb putting, or your other finger putting pressure on your other finger. So, it's like, it's like, and then it's sending the signal up to your brain and back down to your finger that that you want to put pressure on it. So it's we're like biological robots in a way. As soon as the nervous system is gone, you can't feel it. And but you're so used to it being there that you still think it is there. Maybe that's exactly what it is. So your nervous system could then be an extension of your brain, the tendrils, the feeling, if you want, the whiskers of your brain, going out and feeling everything. Makes a lot of sense in a way. So if that were the case, then the clone of you would be the exact same, because it would feel everything the same way. It would reach out the same way. Its central processing unit would be the same way. The only difference is it's not me. Just for propagation. Meat suits developed by ultra-intelligent mitochondria just for propagation. We are entire universes to them. That's true. We are really basically meat suits in a way. So if you took our entire inner workings and put them in a machine, it would be the same. If I took my brain out and my nervous system out and put it in a machine, we would be the same, just not a physical body. I would be the same. So if we do all these different things, and we keep talking about it, and we could learn all these different things from cloning extinct creatures, I say let's do it. I don't say hell no to making a Jurassic Park, or, a plethora of these animals even. I don't want you to make like 1,000 dire wolves and then set them loose in North America, and then again, and then, there's tens of thousands of them roaming around and eating people. That I don't want. But if you make like, 3 or 4, keep them in a zoo or something, or some science lab or something, and whatever, treat them like not terribly, but like, I mean, do something with it so you could work on their genes and experiment on them and do all these things, experiment on their behavior, their social behaviors, all these things. If you could do that, I'm all for that. I'm not really for you creating a 25-foot tall dinosaur, but an 8 to 10-foot dire wolf, I'm for it. And because you could keep doing these things, and all the arguments we just began to present is you could learn how to do these things with human beings, and by testing these beings, you could learn exactly how to create other beings. You could learn how to heal every human. You could get rid of genetic abnormalities. You could get rid of chemical problems in your brain. Now, you might sort that as to be an ethical issue, because we know that your feelings on your sexuality and all these other things are based on the chemicals in your brain. So if you were to change those chemicals, at some point you're kind of playing God, and you could be ruining people's emotions, taking away their emotions, doing all these things. You're changing somebody's sexuality based on your proclivities and your needs and your understanding. So, one could argue that it's an ethical question as well. But I mean, if it were some sort of thing that could help people, I'm all for that. I'm all for studying it for medicine, for helping with age, helping cure illnesses and diseases and genetic problems and all these things. I mean, I'm all for all of that. So if you're for that, awesome. I think we should totally be experimenting on different creatures, on different DNA sequences, everything for 100%. Because it just, I see so much more benefit than things. And besides, I mean, your ethical concerns over the whole thing are is based also on your perspective. And if you're a religious person, any religion, doesn't matter which one, it's based on that perspective as well. So your ethical questions could be based on a religion that's probably wrong, and your wrong religion is whatever you choose to believe based on your ancestors. For example, just last week we talked about Abraham and his wife Sarah, right? And Abraham and Sarah were half brother and sister. And their son their son Isaac, even though he was second born to Abraham's other son Ishmael, became the heir to Abraham because he was the firstborn of the union of a brother and a half sister. And why was this the custom? Because Abraham came out of the city of which was the capital city of Sumer, the Sumerians who believed in the Anunnaki gods, who were the gods who came from a planet within our own solar system that had an orbit of 3,600 years and genetically created human beings on this planet. That's what the Anunnaki did according to the Sumerian texts. So, if Abraham came from that area and the Sumerians believed that your true heir was the one who was born of the union between you and your half-sister, then it would make sense why Isaac became the heir instead of Ishmael, even though Ishmael was the firstborn. So, doing the weave. So I got to point that out now because I hear Smirkanis talk about how I'm doing the weave, and I didn't even know it was a big deal. I just, we have a lot to talk about. So whatever. I mean, you want me to wrap it up in 5 minutes? That ain't going to happen. So, there's too much to talk about. So for example, for the example, when they came out of Sumer and and had their beliefs in their singular God, they still came out and had the cultural references of their time in Sumer and everything. Even though they no longer followed all the Anunnaki gods and they instead had their one singular god that they followed and worshipped, they still had the cultural experiences and references from their city of Sumer. So if 200 years from now there's a clone of me, it may be genetically the same as me, but it's not going to have the same life and cultural references and all those different things that I went through, the experiences, the teachers and educators and all these different things. And it wouldn't be exactly the same, but genetically it would be me. Not only that, but we could, if it's the future, we could continue on with ourselves. So, but these alien beings who could have created us, it's possible that they created many different versions of us at many different times. For example, we look at the story of Romulus and Remus. Romulus and Remus, the founding brothers of Rome, you know, the stories are very fantastical. We don't know what happened. Remember, we're talking about, 3,000 to 3,500 years ago when Romulus and Remus walked the earth and founded the city of Rome. This is before the Roman Empire. This is before the Roman kingdom. This is two guys leaving their home in the city of wherever they came from, probably one of the Etruscan cities, and setting up their own city. Two brothers walking away. But what's interesting about these stories is they're depicted as being just appearing out of nowhere. And then when they're babies, and then they're found by a wolf. Instead of being eaten by the wolf, they're suckled by the she-wolf and raised by the she-wolf. And they hunt and they teach and they do all these things with the she-wolf. And they grow up. Let's look at this now from a science perspective. Because in the ancient astronaut theory, many different things that we consider magic or similar could be misinterpreted technology. So if I'm sitting there and I have a creature, or let's just say like a tank, and the tank it's being supported on the ground by 4 legs all the way around. And at the bottom of it is a tube, and what you do is you put the baby under the tube and they suckle from it. And then you could decorate it to whatever you want, to make it more appealing for the baby, and decorate it. And think of those stars that they hang from a baby's crib, right? It looks nice. It keeps them distracted. It's appealing. It's got bright colors. All these things. It moves. So what if you did the same thing with them? You had a tank filled with some sort of baby formula that allowed them to grow, and you fed them from it. And they kept feeding it until they could grow up and get their own food and hunt. Because the stories say that the she-wolf was, didn't stick with them after they grew up. So, just like a wolf does today, as soon as their babies are grown up, they leave them to go and have their own territory. So, it's possible that it could be the same similar thing. Now, what's interesting is that, you could look at it and say, well, these people who founded one of the greatest cities and the greatest empires, the empire that's gone on to found basically our entire Western world's way of life for the last 3,000 years, is literally founded by some sort of mythical experience. Now, obviously, we know this was thousands of years ago, and like we stated in the beginning, the mythological experiences are our modern interpretations of the experiences and the stories that were told to us by our ancestors. These experiences told to us by our ancestors are, just that. stories, experiences, but we don't live through them. So we interpret them in our own time. They might have been, the story might have been we were suckled by this container-like thing, this barrel. And they say, well, how could you be suckled by it? So generations later, it becomes that it was a wolf and not, some tank on the floor, or hanging up on a wall or something. It wasn't anything like that. But in reality, that's really what it was. These beings now just appeared out of nowhere. Where did they come from? And then they suddenly were strong enough and warrior-like and smart enough to build this city and on a marshland that is barely habitable and all this stuff, and they got to shore up the land, drain some of the swamp. How do you do that 3,000 years ago? Do you have help? Are you, just smarter than we know today? Did you invent the technology? Is it easier to do than we make it out to be today with our own modern technology? These are all possible things. And so when you look at the past and the mythological past, you have to look at it through a different lens. You have to look at it through our own type of lens. Now, we're just speculating here that it could be some sort of machinery type of thing. We have no idea, obviously, to this day. But, it's entirely plausible that it could be something similar to that. Now, if you were to go and let's say we found the bones of Romulus, right? And there was, a little meat left on the bones. And you were able to get a DNA sample of that. And you asked him, and you said, did you really get suckled by a wolf? He'll be like, well, if you consider my mother's beard to be wolf-like, then yeah. And it's like, it could be. Take a sip of water. And he's like, well, it could be. And so, everything gets mythologized and, deified over the centuries. Everybody wants to deify somebody else, to worship somebody else. So, it could be just something like that. But genetically speaking, that would be the same creature. But would he have the same thoughts and memories? We go back to the same concept. If our memories are stored within our muscles and within our brains, and you were able to regrow it exactly the same, you might have it. You might have the same being with the same memories, the same brain, the same everything, but you might not. And the reason is because you don't, you're making new tissue with the old genetic memory. So if it's stored physically in the tissue, then it would be there. But if it's not stored physically in the tissue and it's stored just, in your brain or in the ether or whatever, then that being wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't have the memories to know if it even was suckled by a wolf or not. So all these things could be interpreted technology and misinterpreted stories that have been mythologized over the years. Now, we mentioned before that this could really be, could help us with our genetic studies and all of that, but If you could just transplant your brain into a robotic body, why wouldn't you just do that? You would then be immortal. You wouldn't have any diseases that could kill you. Viruses wouldn't be able to kill you unless it was like, some sort of computer virus or something. Um, you know, because we know that trillions of viruses are coming through from space every single day. So there's no reason why you wouldn't expect that just because we could do all these genetic experiments doesn't mean that there won't be a new virus that lands here on Earth that we could not be immune to or not have been exposed to before. So just because I can clone myself and genetically alter myself to be immune to diseases doesn't mean that I'm immune to all diseases and viruses and different things. So why wouldn't I want to transplant it into a robotic body? I could get rid of all the genetic factors. My body wouldn't age. I could then be near immortal. The parts might wear out over time. So is that considered aging? Maybe. If I have these parts wear out over time and um, you know all these things wear out over time, and that could be a type of aging, because as you go along, in fact, it is really a type of aging, not could be. It is a type of aging. Your technological devices that we have today don't last forever. They last a long time, but they don't last forever. So you always need new ones. There's new products, better products, and even if they were good back then, they still aren't the best. They've worn out over time. You've used them. So age for machinery does exist. But you would have to replace, different parts of it, and then you could potentially live forever. If my arm gets old or my whole body, robotic body gets old, I could just replace myself with a new robot and keep on going, and keep on living. And it's entirely possible because we look at I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that frame of thought. Let me think about it this way. Um, if if you could place yourself and your brain and your nervous system in a robotic body, you could potentially live forever. These experiments that we're doing today with artificial implants, neural implants, all these things, you could literally extend your body and live forever. There's the multiple experiments going on all around the world where people are studying how to create robotic limbs with nervous systems, or limbs that you could control from distances, or limbs that you could control, you know, like with your brain, as if like they were your real limb, like a prosthetic implant or something. You could get, say I lost my leg, like I was a combat veteran or something, and, um, and my leg got cut off. And now they have a robotic leg and they put it on, and it's got a nervous system in it that's wired into my own nervous system, and I could feel it just as if I'm feeling my own leg right now. as if before I had the leg. So, as if before I had the right when I had my regular leg. So, and they're working on this. I watched this whole experiment where they took a neural implant and they put the neural implant in the guy's limb, and then they put the robotic arm in England. And the guy is here in New York, in the US. And connected them both to the internet. And the guy is closing his hand, and at the exact same time, or a few milliseconds later, the robotic hand is closing in England. So, and then they did another experiment where the guy, they put they had a hand, and they put a nervous implant like right into their wrist bone, just below the hand, or into their nerves over there or whatever, and then they put him separate from the hand, right? And he's not closing his hand, but thinking that he wants his hand to close, and the nervous system impulse is going from his brain into the implant that's in his wrist and sending the signal to the artificial limb that's separate from his body, and he's able to control it. So if you could control, wire in some sort of nervous system that controls other devices, you could control everything. Let's say if I had a drone and I neural implanted it into my visual cortex, right? And I wanted to control it and fly around with it. I literally just put it into my nervous system and my motor system, and I think about it, and the drone lifts off the ground and flies away. And I want it to turn right, and it turns right, and I want it to turn left, and it turns left. I could build a robot, put the robot, have a chip in my brain that did the exact same thing, and I could control it, and then that robot could be the extension of me. I could give the robot wings, and the robot could fly, and I could have the robot go and pick something off the high shelf at Walmart. What about teleportation? Wouldn't you technically have to die to get turned into data, send, received, and then reconstructed? I mean, that's peak cloning. That is a great point, Professor. Let's explore that for a moment. I would. Your answer is yes. You would be a clone. You wouldn't really be a clone, though. Essentially, I'd be a new me. It would almost be the same concept of if I were to have a clone of me that was a one-to-one relationship of me, but I was still alive. That's not me, that's the new me. Because we're both me, we're both alive, we're both conscious, but I'm still alive, so it's not 100% me, it's a new me. It would be the same sort of thing if I were to break myself down into, microscopic particles and then fully form myself into microscopic particles. I would be, I guess, the same me, but I'd be a new me. I wouldn't be a clone because I'm not a genetic one-to-one relationship of me, but be different. I'm still me, just a new version of me because I have new whatever. It's almost like it's like starting when you're playing a video game and you beat the whole game, and then it says new game plus, and you start the game over again, and you're still you. You have all your powers, your guns are all advanced, your weapons are whatever, everything's good. It's just that you're starting the game from scratch and whatever. It's kind of like that, I guess it would be. Right? Yeah, right? Exactly. But it's kind of like that, I think, in a way. You would be a it's like New Game Plus. I'm still me. I still have all my powers and my knowledge, but I got this new body and the damage isn't there. And you did 0 damage to me so far, in the game. I haven't got wounded or killed yet. I haven't been maimed. I haven't been, attempted murder on me or whatever. Nothing. It's New Game Plus. I think that makes sense. Which or save states. Well, no, a save state would mean that I would have to go back in our perception of time. Remember, time doesn't exist, but it exists in our perspective because our brain wants to view things in a linear perspective, in a this happened, then this happened, then this happened perspective. But so time exists in that way because our brain orders events into a timeline, into a perspective. So your save state would mean that not only would I have to pause, but the entire universe would have to pause, and then I would, have to be able to resume. But if you're like me and time is just a perspective, I can have a save state all day because I can just separate myself from the universe and the universe can go on, but I'm still not here. It's like an online video game, for example. I pause the game is still paused for me. The characters in the storyline have not progressed. Everything's the same. My character still has the same amount of damage, the same abilities, the same, look that it has, the same everything. But the world has continued on. Other people have played it. Other people have, beaten the level that I'm still on. Other people have killed the final boss. Other people have, become the king, the number one player, whatever, all those things. I would say that would be more of what it's like for me, from my perspective, if you live with time as being only a perspective and not a constant. It's like an online open world game. I pause the game, but the game doesn't pause. Life is like that, and even if I died, you know, life died for me, but it didn't die for everybody. It didn't die for the whole universe. Life continued on, and then I had to start a new game because I died. I mean, it's a whole thing. So if you could continue on, so we're bringing it home. We're bringing it home. So if you could make yourself a robotic creature, all the recent patches to get used to. Yeah, right, exactly. If I got a close, dude, I'm sitting there and you gotta update. I gotta update. I gotta get used to all the new things that are going on in the world. It's like I just paused and it was 1954, and then I woke up in 2025, and I'm like, what the hell is this smartphone thing? It's like the same thing. And so, but let's keep it with the ancient. Let's go back to the ancient world for a moment, because it seems to me and to other ancient astronaut theorists that some of these ancient cultures might have actually known that these genetic things, ideas, experiments, reality would be plausible. And maybe they understood the body better than we did, or at least in a different way than we did. Because if they didn't, there's no cause for them to create mummies. There's no cause for Egyptians and South Americans and all these things to create mummies. There's no reason for it. Because you could create because today we know that these mummies are so well preserved that we might be able to create clones from them. We have hair and skin samples in some of these mummies that are still left over because they've been so well preserved. And that's why the belief in afterlives, exactly. And how would you know these things, by the way? Who taught you these things? How would you know this? Many ancient astronaut theorists think that we started mummifying our dead because we misunderstood the technology of seeing extraterrestrials come out of hypersleep. And, they came out of a thing that looked like a coffin. And, they woke up out of it and they said, geez, what time is it? And they got up and they were like, oh, I went to sleep and now I'm here alive. And they said, you just woke up out of a coffin. It's a miracle. You just rose from the dead. You're a god who came back to life. And he's like, no, I'm just some guy in a spaceship. And they're like, spaceship? No, the heavens. And then over time, the term for space, the heavens, becomes heaven. And afterlives of living after your original life becomes this whole mystical world about us, when in reality these beings could have just been explaining to our ancestors that it's possible that if you preserve your body in the future, we're able to take the genetic samples of that and clone you so that you could live again. Maybe that's what they were told. Maybe that's where it all comes from. And then over the years, it was misinterpreted into being this whole religious and mythological thing when it never really was that. At least that's what many ancient astronaut theorists believe, that it was a misinterpreted technology. Possible. It's very possible, actually. I believe it is possible. Because if I looked at that, just think about going back to 1822 or any time before then and showing your great-grandparent of that time your smartphone today. They're like, oh, well, I want to see an image of some South African bird, and I'm all the way over here in Alaska. And you just whip up on your phone, no problem, the image of the South African bird. And you're like, and that person's like, what are you showing me? You're a wizard. How did you do that? You're a magician. You're all these things, and you want to see a video of a baby, you want to hear music play out of a device, it all comes right out of your phone. But 100, 200 years ago, show that to any of your ancestors, you're a wizard. They might even burn you at the stake. That's how it was. And, they didn't understand the technology. So it's entirely plausible that our ancestors 5,000 or more years ago experienced something similar because they didn't understand the technology. You look at in South America, that was Indonesia, in Nan Madal. My mouth was so dry from talking. Ugh, thirsty. And there's these stories in Nan Madal of these giant roosters that would go to the top of the mountain, cut off the pieces of the what is it, basalt or whatever that they use to make it, and they would fly those pieces over. Well, today we call our planes birds. Pilots say, "This is my bird I'm flying in." You know, think about World War II and World War II movies. They all say bird, you know, with their planes. And so why wouldn't they? And then if you're an ancient person and your only reference is a regular bird that you see in the sky, a giant machine with bird-like wings, maybe even a front that may be similar to a point like a beak, which is what a lot of our current planes look like, it could be possible that you could misinterpret that machinery as a bird. So these alien creatures with advanced machinery, or maybe even human beings with advanced machinery, would have literally used this machinery to fly the columns or on the building material down to the construction site. And they would fly it through, and then you would say, well, oh, and then you're an old person from 5,000 years ago, a regular indigenous human being, and you say, oh my God, this giant bird just flew over here with that giant rock in it was carrying. How is that possible? But you don't know that it's a piece of machinery. So what I'm getting at is it's all perspective. Everything's perspective. Even your genetic, even your life, your genes really only go so far. You know, your genetic, parts of you are not your whole life. They're not your whole being. They're not your whole everything. They're a lot of you, most of you, maybe it determines what your body can do and its limitations and whatever, but it's not your experiences, it's not your thoughts, it's not any of those things. It's your physical code, basically, is what it is. And so if I were to, so the answer is are these dire wolves that they recreated, are they the same as the dire wolves from 10,000 years ago that went extinct just at the end of the last ice age when the flood started happening? Is that the case? The answer is no. It's not the same being because it doesn't have the same environment. But if it's a genetic one-to-one relationship, it is the same being, and we could still use that for studying humans, studying advancements in technology, advancements in genetic manipulation. If you could prove that you clone that being one-to-one, you literally can prove that you could do all these other things. You know, what's interesting too is if you look at the videos and hear the descriptions and the talks about these dire wolves, you know, it's really interesting because for many years, psychologists have theorized that you could look into, you could take a wolf, and if you raised a wolf out of the wild, it would be tamer around you because you could, you would raise it. It would know nothing different. It's you. And some psychologists and sociologists even might have theorized that this was how the first wolves became domesticated dogs. Because, one wolf or two wolves or a pack of them weren't as scared as of the human beings, and they didn't really act threatening to the human beings, and so therefore they didn't they would hang out with them, and the humans would feed them, and then they got used to accepting the food from the humans, and they realized, hey, these humans aren't bad, and the humans realized, hey, these wolves aren't bad. And then after a while, the people would see these wolves and say, hey, look, it's the wolves, and then come here, puppy, I got a snack for you. And eventually, over centuries and decades or whatever, they became the domesticated dogs, and then over thousands of years, and we're at the dogs that they are today. Well, that's all well and good, and theoretically, it's pretty sound. It's a pretty sound argument. However, with these genetic experiments being done with the cloning of the dire wolves, it's probably 100% wrong. Because these dire wolves have no other ancestors alive today for 10,000 plus years. They have no nothing. So theoretically, it would be a great psychological experiment on if you could raise these wolves, which the last time they existed was purely wild animals. If you could raise them from birth to be just like everybody else's dog, they could be just like a puppy. You would prove that these wolves psychologically, after just being used to and raised by humans over time, eventually became dogs. You would prove that. However, that is not the case of what's happening right now. These dire wolves want absolutely nothing to do with human beings. Not only that, but they're afraid of them. They will not interact with the human beings. They won't even interact with their handlers, who are the ones who feed them on a daily basis and who are the ones who raised them from birth and suckled them with the milk that they needed. Now remember, this goes back to Romulus and Remus. Romulus and Remus had no parents. They were human beings raised by a wolf. But they didn't become wolf-like. They didn't live in the wild and grow hairy and snarl and growl. They eventually went on to live like normal people because their genes and their history makes them part of it. These beings, these dire wolves, are purely wild animals. They don't even want to be around their handlers who raise them, who basically are their mother. It could be the same thing with all these other creatures. You hear all these things, and it could be it could be the exact same thing. These beings are not the same as they were, but they weren't the ones who were domesticated or raised. These dire wolves want to be totally away from humans because they're genetically not the same as these tame dogs. They might not even be the same genetic line of wolves. I think I think they come from like gray wolves or blue, or some sort of blue-nosed wolf or something from like whatever is where the domesticated dogs originally came from. You can look it up, but I'm not going to do that right now. But anyway, so we know that they came from a certain line of wolves. It just depends on what line, what time frame, and how long it took. Because if so it proves that you can't just take a wild animal and raise it from birth and expect it to be a domesticated dog or house cat. It's not going to happen. And look at all these people, for example, who get monkeys for pets. They have them as monkeys for pets for years. And then all of a sudden, he raises it, he feeds it every day, he's had it for 10 years, and then the monkey decides to rip its eyeball out and eat it because it's a wild animal. It's not, something's missing in its brain to be able to understand the domestication part. Basically, what I'm saying is something's missing from its genetics to understand the domestication part. Because it's not just environment. If it were just environment, then you could take a wolf, a baby wolf, as the second it's born and raise it to be your puppy in your house. That would be the case, but that's not the case at all in reality. So we know that it has to be some sort of genetic event as well. It's part genes and part environment. So that person who stated that these dire wolves, aren't the same dire wolves because they don't have the same environment. Yeah, of course we know that. I'm not going to, recreate the earth for the same as 10,000 years ago where 70% of the planet was frozen in ice. I mean, fuck that. I don't know about you, but it's already cold out here. I don't want it to be any colder. Thank God, it's starting to get warm out. I mean, seriously, because, do you want it to be colder? It's friggin' cold. And, so all these wonderful things, are going on in the world and in the universe, but I still think that we want to be able to clone these beings because we need to understand that it's more. See, we learn, we take advantage in our own time for our education system. And, we have, our education system, we talk about how our, how do I want to say it? I can't think of how I want to say it. Basically, we think of things like, we learn today that psychology, in our high school psychology, college psychology, we all learn about, how life is part environment, part psychology. And, so we take advantage today of our education system and thinking that all humans knew this. But psychology is a very new field. Even though it's 100 years old or more, humans have been around for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. The first hominids we have records of go back to over 250,000 years ago. So it could be a whole bunch of different conversations like that. And then the how do I want to continue on with this? These animals, these creatures, these dire wolves, Romulus and Remus. When I first heard that they were named Romulus and Remus, the first thing I thought of, well, is one of them going to kill and eat the other? Because that would prove that we as humans didn't understand their their survival skills, how they grew up, their need for their nutrients. We might feed them whatever and we think oh, the steak is good, but maybe they needed, our steak isn't as nutritious as their steak was. Right? So then, in turn, because one of them needed more nutrients, they went and killed the other and ate the other. to get the nutrients that their body was lacking. And I thought about that because I was like, well, that's interesting because how do we know that they didn't actually do that during their own time when they lived in their own world? Maybe it was a part of their growing up. Maybe they fought with each other and the child who survived was the one that lived. And maybe that was part of it because the world was so cold at the time that they had less of a hunting territory. So their hunting territory was, more expansive and wider, and so they couldn't have as many wolves, otherwise they'd be, fighting for territory more than they already were. And there wouldn't be as much food for each of them. So maybe they did do something similar like that where they just ate their own, siblings and cousins. Maybe maybe the entire story of the Roman Romulus and Remus were true about the founders, but maybe it wasn't the wolf who raised them, but them who raised the wolf. Maybe it's a story of our own domestication of dogs. Maybe it goes all the way back to then, and just the story of it has been mythologized, misinterpreted, anything. Could be possible. Could be a whole number of things. We know that these guys founded the city. We don't really have written records of it because finding written records from that time is incredibly difficult. But we know that, they were, the founders. We know that they have the story of the mythology behind their founding and all of that. So, what about these genetic Romulus and Remuses? These wolves, I think are the future. I think these wolves from the past are the future, because these wolves from the past are going to lead our science of the future. Now that we know that these beings were not domesticated into dogs eventually, straight from the womb, like how some of us have psychologically imagined thousands of years ago. Because if that were true, then you could just do that, even with a dire wolf. In fact, it would be more proof that it was true that you could do it with a dire wolf than with a modern day tiger, because the dire wolf would be 10,000 years ago, which could be, further back in time to when people started domesticating animals. I'm not sure of the actual date, but the length of time is what I'm referring to, how long ago it was. So, I think that being able to do these things has 10,000 more benefits, and the only negatives for it would be if your perspective was a religious perspective or an ethical perspective based on your religious perspective. That's the only way I could see it as being a problem, because there's just too many benefits. There's too many things that benefit our society from just being able to clone these creatures. See, the question is, here's the thing, is what I didn't think of as before is we should clone them again with the same as the original genetic sample. Not, a clone of the clone, but maybe we should make another clone from the original. Then if they act the same again and behave the exact same way, we would therefore have proof that behavior was as much genetic as it was for our environment. The psychological benefits of that would be enormous. We would understand psychology and the human mind and the animal mind a billion times better than we would be able to, than we are just now, just by doing our therapy sessions and other experiments and whatever. It would be a game changer. It would be new game plus plus. It would be unbelievable. I'd like to thank you all for joining me today on this wonderful, wonderful day. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope everybody has a great week. We will see you next time. Make sure you're following on X for all post notifications and all things like that, going live, all of that. And make sure you check out the website. Please check out the website. That is the key. We're having new things coming out soon on there, and you'll see it, and then we'll post to X that it's out and all of that. And much love. I appreciate y'all for chilling with me today. I appreciate you, Professor, for your wonderful questions. I hope everybody has a great day. Everybody has a wonderful time.